Hey y'all, what's going on? It's your girl Ryan Nicole, and I'm back with Black Ass Art History Presents. And just to give a disclaimer, I am slowly getting my voice back from being sick from a couple of weeks ago. So there may be some pauses so I could take a sip, but I at least wanted to make sure I got this dropped on Monday, which is today, so you all can go ahead and enjoy. So this is our first week, and based on previous response and engagement, I've set it up to be more academic setting. So we're going to have units that can last anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. This will help create continuity and help retain the information that you learn. This unit, entitled Y'all Late to the Revolution, gives a unique approach to how the transatlantic slave trade commenced, as well as revolts and the artwork that emerges from it. So the first chapter is Resistance from the Beginning, Europe's Interest in Africa. Here's a disclaimer. The content, images, and language that you're about to experience may be offensive and may lead to triggers. Viewer discretion is advised. Black Ass Art History is committed to educating its audiences on a diaspora of melanated people with the intent to provide an honest and holistic history of our narratives. We are committed to ensuring our history and stories are not filtered through white supremacy indoctrination, dogma, or pseudo-social science. Without further ado, let's get started. So each week we're going to have an agenda, and then within the agenda, it's going to be highlighted. And so as you see, we're going to look at the brief overview of Europe's interest in Africa. So let's start with Europe issues. So this takes place roughly from 900 years, so from 480 to about 1300 AD. As the empires around the world are expanding, especially in Africa, news is traveling through the Saharan trade, which is the Saharan Desert, through the Mediterranean, the Iberian Peninsula, which is present-day Portugal and Spain, and so forth. Although most of Europe was in the Dark Ages, the Iberian Peninsula flourished thanks to the North African group called the Moors. These were Muslim people bringing their breadth of knowledge, history, astronomy, music conservatories, hygiene, and health practices since 711 AD. Don't worry, this is going to be a segment all on itself. So keep in mind, Europe referred to Africa as the dark continent. So these are just some of the things that happened. Roman Empire falls in 476 AD. The Black Death of the bubonic plague. You have the Crusades, the Hundred Years' Wars, feudalism, and Magna Carta. But let's get started by looking at the continent first with a very well-known king. Meet Mansa Musa ibn Abi Bakr ibn Abi al-Aswa, or we're just going to call him Mansa Musa the First. He is the ninth Mansa of Mali. He was a devout Muslim. He is the wealthiest man that ever lived. According to Forbes in 2023, his estimated net worth is $900 billion. Musa is also known for his Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, and the generosity that he bestowed on all that encountered him in his caravan. So this is an image of Mansa Musa's Hajj from Getty Images, and although it looks really dramatic, this was actually authentically what it is. He did have a caravan of 60,000 men and 12,000 slaves. Keep in mind, the slavery in Africa and the slavery of the transatlantic slave trade are two different anomalies. But just to go back to, a Hajj is an annual pilgrimage for the followers of Islam. It's a journey to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, to be in the presence of the Kaaba, which is the house of Allah. So that big square that we see. Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca was between 1324 and 1325. He was so generous in giving gold and his wealth, he disrupted Egypt's economy. On his return back, he launched a large building campaign in two cities that became a part of the Malian Empire, which is Gao and Timbuktu. He embarked on an incredible expansion of these cities by building mosques and madrasas are any building that's of education and institution. This is an example of one of the great mosques in Djari in Timbuktu. So a lot of these buildings that are still in Timbuktu and Gao and Mali have this same design and pattern from hundreds of years ago. Since Europe is now coming out of the Dark Ages, fall of Rome, Europe is entering what is known as the Age of Discovery. So this is maritime traveling across the sea, and it becomes a large initiative across many monarchs in the regions of Europe. These navigators began to sail across the seas, and also we're going to see the development of cartography or map making. The map we're looking at right now is of Angelino Dorset in 1339. If you look at the upper portion of it, it's mostly Europe. That blue body of water, that crooked line below, that is the Strait of Gibraltar, and it separates the North Africa and Spain and Portugal. And in a highlighted red box, you're going to notice a figure. This is one of the earliest images of Mansa Musa to be on a map. It was not uncommon for maps to have icons, symbols, emblems, or figures to denote areas. Now, why is Musa on this map? Remember, when he had traveled across to get to Mecca, stories of his wealth traveled across both Europe and Asia about this wealthy king who was generous in giving gold. Notice he's seated on a throne, holding a scepter, but as map making continues in advance, we will also see Musa's image change. So next we have the Catalan Atlas, and it was published in 1375 by Abraham Crescas. This particular map is a bit more robust, so we're seeing like roads, we're seeing different bodies of water, legends, notes, and again, even more icons. Compared to the previous map, this is the map that's starting to look a little bit more like the Europe when we look at maps and atlases that we see today. Again, highlighted in that red box, we have a Musa icon with some differences. First difference, Musa's black. And the previous one, he wasn't. Musa is black. He's painted as an African. And if you notice, his scepter is a little bit more defined, but his crown is gold. And then we also have him sitting on maybe a gold throne, but he's holding a goblet of gold. And this is going to be the image and more images alike that Europe is starting to see more about this quote unquote dark continent. So one of the earliest explorers was Nicoloso de Rico. He was sent by the King of Portugal to the Canary Islands in 1341. Honestly, he just wanted to see what was there. He found people, which is the Guanches indigenous people, black folks, or chill. It was a dye that is coveted at this time during Europe, and sugarcane. After de Rico brought back these array of goods from the Canary Islands, now Europe is really starting to get on this traveling. This is Prince Henry the Navigator. He's the Duke of Viseu in Portugal. He comes from a lot of money, and he had resources. He was in several night ships. He was lord over a couple of things. So he just has multiple bags at this point in his life. His father, John I, captured Ceuta. Ceuta was this amazing port in North Africa, and it was ran by Muslims. This was also one of the main trading ports in North Africa between Portugal, Spain, and Europe to the Saharan and below. And Henry was honestly just wanting to figure out, where's this gold coming from? I don't want to know where the Muslims, trade with the Muslims. I want to get it myself. Henry did do one thing interesting. He was innovative in changing the scale of the boats. The boats back then were huge. He made them smaller to navigate the waters better. Unfortunately, by 1441, he did have some success in sailing along the west coast of Africa, and from there he would begin selling enslaved Africans in Portugal. This is Cape Bojador. Cape Bojador was the furthest south that has been traveled along the west coast of Africa. So it's really not that far at all. And this comes from superstitions and myths from sailors that there's sea monsters, there's sirens, there's creatures, blah. Eventually, the Portuguese would pass the known territory and reach the Saharan trade in 1434. This was with Captain Gilles Eames. He was one of Henry's commanders, and he sailed past it. And this is actually quite important because east of Europe was Constantinople, which was a Byzantine empire, who was on the route to the Silk Road. So basically, India to get the spices, silk, everything, stuff that they didn't use for their food either. He has failed and has fallen to the Muslim Ottomans, so Turkish in 1453. So the Turkish Sultan, Mehmed II, and the empire issued a decree that Silk Road would not be accessible to Christian traders. because, of course, Mehmed II is Muslim. So, for the remainder of the 15th century, the Portuguese would continue to travel along the west coast of Africa. Although reaching India by sea was the goal, this also begins the stealing of Africans being kidnapped and sold into Europe. But by 1498, Portuguese explored Vasco da Gama is the first person who would circumvent Africa and make it to India by sea. And this is just the example of one of the ports. This is the Castelo de San Jorge de Mina, or St. George of the Mine Castle. Although it was originally a trade settlement for Portugal, it would soon become one of the most important ports of the transatlantic slave trade. Elmina Castle is known for the infamous Door of No Return. This would be one of the most trafficked ports of enslaved persons. So while the Portuguese have made their way to India via sea, an Italian backed by Spain was determined to reach India by sailing west. Enter the genocider himself, Christopher Columbus. Although he's considered a quote unquote explorer and navigator that was quote unquote great, Columbus is actually self educated. He has no formal training, he has no backing of schools or academies. We know that he was not the sharpest sword in the sheath. If anything, Columbus was dumb and violent. Yet, Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain would finance his trip in 1486 and set sail for 1492. Columbus would run into financial issues, and then he got kidnapped at one point by pirates when he was trying to get money from Henry VII in England. But nonetheless, Ferdinand states if he succeeds, he can be governor over any new lands crowned in the name of Spain. What most people don't know is that Columbus actually made 4 voyages. Now, please understand what happened to the indigenous people of all these islands. When Columbus arrived at Hispaniola, which is present day Haiti and Dominican Republic, the indigenous population was roughly 2 million. Within 25 years of first contact with Columbus, Spaniards and Portuguese, their population dropped by an abysmal 80 to 95%. So this is just, I'm going to stay on this for a little bit. This is just to show some of the outcomes of his 4 voyages. So again, the Taino population in Santo Domingo decreased drastically within 25 years of their first encounter. Old world European disease decimated the indigenous people of the Caribbean and West Indians. And so what happens is they just go. There's no people left. As they're setting up these colonies, they have no one to work these colonies because the indigenous people are dying because of diseases. And also, Columbus is demanding for them to tell them where the gold is. They're just looking at them. And so now he just starts killing them. So as we see in 1493 to 96, they implemented Encomenda. Encomenda is a reward system, basically telling the settlers, like, look, if you can make them your slaves, they're going to be your slaves. And they also started to receive large sums from Spain to send enslaved persons of the indigenous people. So then Columbus would punish fellow Europeans at one point on his 3rd trip. And it was Francisco de Bobadilla who advised Columbus of cruelty. Columbus and his son actually got in prison. And then Ferdinand released Columbus due to false accusations and realized that Bobadilla just wanted to be the governor. And then on his last voyage, hurricanes and weather impacted his travels, and he was stranded in Jamaica for 6 months. But to go back, in 1501, Spanish colonists began importing enslaved Africans from the Iberian Peninsula to their Santo Domingo colony on the island of Hispaniola. The French would begin their participation of the slave trade early to mid 1500s. The Dutch Netherlands participated in late 1500s, however, became big in trading in the 1600s because they went to the coast of West Africa and also where the Portuguese settled and just started attacking. They're like, y'all already done the work. We're just going to take it from here. Denmark joined the slave trade around 1650. And I'm still trying to understand what the hell Denmark needed enslaved people for. And in the U.S., enslaved Africans arrived as early as 1500s. However, 1619 in the Jamestown colony is the official date. Just a quick recap. Europe emerged from the Dark Ages and began its Age of Discovery. Mansa Musa's Hajj, the distribution of wealth and gal and Timbuktu's becoming incredible trading centers, drew attention to Africa. Henry the Navigator would bring the first enslaved persons to Europe, specifically Portugal. Portugal would become the first country to circumvent Africa to reach India by sea. Christopher Columbus, although incompetent, made 4 trips to the New World or West Indies, opening up Europe to new land, to new people, and the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. I hope you all enjoy. I hope you all were able to understand, even though my voice is going out. But thank you so much for this first segment of Black Ass Art History. Y'all late to the revolution. And I will see you all tomorrow. Have a blessed day.